Hey guys, welcome back from spring break. This is Mr. Adams. Um, I wanted to make a video to kind of give you a segue from where we left off with the amendments before spring break into our next unit, which is about the civil rights movement and how these things connect. So this one, I really, really, really wish we were together in class because I'd be able to take so much time to really get into all this content. This is my absolute favorite part of our curriculum to learn about and talk about because the civil rights movement, in my opinion, is just one of the most defining aspects of what makes America the country that it is and the way that people are establishing themselves as active citizens in control of their rights. um, Really, really has a deep, deep spot in my heart. A lot of things I personally feel very passionate about, as well as I just think it's so great for our actual, um, the spectrum of our class, which is civics. So I'm gonna try to give you as much content as I can, and kind of point you in certain directions. This would be one that I want you to have as many questions as possible to ask. Um, so just as a recap, the last unit was about the Bill of Rights, which specifically was the first 10 amendments that were added to the Constitution in order for it to be officially agreed upon and signed, which then back in the 1700s made the Constitution the basically instruction manual for our brand new government. And to this day, it's what still stands. And the amendments were these additional rules that would be allowed to be added that would enhance the manual, so to speak. So the last couple weeks, I was trying to teach you about specifically the first 10, which are the most famous, called the Bill of Rights. So those are the things your First Amendment, freedom of speech, what you see on the screen right now, the Fourth and Fifth Amendments, no unreasonable search or seizure of your personal property, the rights of the accused if you're arrested. So the Constitution did give rules on how to add more amendments in the future because when they first wrote it, all those old founding fathers in the 1700s, they were aware that it worked for them at the moment, but they had enough of a vision that they understood that changes were going to come, the future was going to be different. And so they did establish a process that they felt was fair for then adding future amendments to the Constitution. And it was intentionally made to be very difficult to add more amendments because they immediately become law for all states. All states are simultaneously affected. So it's not like you could have the state of Massachusetts want to add something that benefits them, but then hurts Texas or hurts New Jersey. An amendment to the Constitution becomes instant law for everybody. So purposely, this process is very difficult. To this day, it's been some 230 years later after the Constitution was written, there's been thousands of attempts to make these changes, but only 17 have been official new amendments. And even the most recent, the last one, happened back in 1992, which, as far as some of you are concerned, that's when the dinosaurs still roam the earth. So the ones that we kind of target, we left off at number 10, but not too long after that, the Civil War became the big driving national problem. And with that, upon the conclusion of the Civil War, were added the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, which made slavery illegal. It gave states rights that could not be taken away from citizens without due process of the law. And it also then gave all men the right to vote, no matter their skin color. Now, that's important because Didn't say anything about having women have the right to vote, but all men, regardless of your skin color now, could have the right to vote. But although these amendments technically got rid of slavery and gave African Americans the right to vote back in the 1860s, discrimination prevented these freedoms from truly being enjoyed by some African Americans, and specifically ones who lived in the southern states. So for basically like, it's crazy, but for like 100 years, these amendments did exist, but they weren't able to actually be enjoyed because of the fact that specific state laws made discrimination legal, which then kind of prevented African Americans from truly being able to have these freedoms. So what you see on the screen are some like classic images of this discrimination, the separate hospitality facilities for like swimming pools, libraries, hotels, drinking fountains, restaurants. This little boy on the right side of the screen, obviously, his parents raised him to be a proponent of segregation in school, saying, we won't go to school with Negroes. That was something that I was giving you a little bit of a lead off with the Civil Rights DBQ a month ago. And we're going to get back into that again about segregation in schools and how, if that still existed, our own classroom would be illegal right now. I do want to give a quick shout out, though, to women's right to vote and the Native Americans' right to vote, because those were also two other, like, when you talk about civil rights, it's kind of like a bigger umbrella of all the different efforts that have been made throughout American history to gain more, equalities and non-discrimination laws. The women's right to vote and the Native American right to vote came in the 1920s. Those were definitely heralded as like long, long overdue. But for the sake of brevity, for this unit, it's going to concentrate primarily on the 1950s and 60s movement that was championed by all of our communities of color that became kind of the most famous. So I do say that just because I want to make clear that when we talk about the civil rights movement, I'm not meaning to exclude other important movements that gained additional civil liberties, such as the women's right to vote, Native Americans' right to vote, but just that there's so much to talk about that happened in such a short amount of time in the 1950s and 60s that for the sake of our learning for our classroom, that's what we're going to focus on. So we will be exploring through at least this week into the next one, the famous people, the issues, and the places that have been burned now into our nation's history as the components for change for these greater civil liberties that we now enjoy and maybe take for granted. So like the equal access to voting rights, the equal access to fair housing, equal education. All of these things we're going to explore, as well as the famous people like Dr. King and the famous places like Selma, and how they connect to, even now in 2020, taking advantage of your civil liberties. Okay, so I'll end the video there because it's probably pretty long, but this is a great just kind of bridge between what we were learning before and how this connects.